your federal government, where you pay your federal taxes, is on a mission to destroy our housing market through various channels. Am I exaggerating? I don't think so. Let's take a look at multiple ways, not one, not two, but three different ways that today your government is attempting to make buying housing harder than ever. I'm Bill Gross. This is my weekly real estate market update. We send this out every week on Monday. You can subscribe to it, watch it on YouTube video, and I'd love to have you join us regularly. So before we get into the stories, let's take a look at the statistics to set where we are in the economy. I always think it's important to have real data, and then we can dissect the fake news and understand what they're trying to sell us on. In any economy, there's two factors that determine where the economy is. There's the demand and supply. Demand, buyers, is determined in real estate by interest rates, and supply, sellers, is by inventory. Let's take a look at those two both today. We'll start off with interest rates, where really we had a somewhat significant, I think, milestone, and that rates dropped down below slightly at 7% at 6.82%. So we've been at this slightly above 7% for weeks. We've been in this range for, all year long so far, and into last year. We've been as high as 8%, but had been down below between 8 and 7 almost all this past year, and now we've broken down below. So is the trend? I don't know. If you're in an escrow, get your rate locked in right now if you can, because you'll save some money. And if you're not, good time to jump in, but there'll be more buyers falling in behind you, so just be careful. So overall, interest rates are at a level now where we will have more buyers, not less, coming in the market to add some more demand. At the same time, supply is getting tighter than ever. Now, despite some of the stories I've read, here's actual inventory nationwide. This is 2024. We have about 568,000 homes for sale, which is just slightly above last year's 494. So we're about, 160,000 more than a year ago. Now, what I want to say is, you can see this year is dropping. Last year was slightly rising. This is still, last year and this year are the lowest ever for other than pandemic years. These lower years were pandemic years. The years pre-pandemic were higher. So the new normal, we used to have about 800,000 homes for sale, and while now we have only 568,000 and declining, it still is by all historical standards extremely tight. And as long as that's the case, I'm not saying that we will not have a tough real estate market, but I am saying the prices can't crash unless there's way more houses on the market to sell and the sellers give up and cut the price. That's not happening. Now, real estate is somewhat local. So in Los Angeles, we see kind of the same thing. Let's take a look at Los Angeles. We'll bring that on. Oops, where are we here? Should step instead. There we are. We'll put that in. There we go. This is from Altus Research, which is a great source. They take all the factors in the economy in a market and give a ranking, and LA just came back down to 40. Now, it had been 41 for quite a while. Before that, it was 42 for quite a while. So our market has gone steadily from a intense seller's market to a strong seller's market to a seller's market. It's still slightly a seller's market towards equilibrium. And I think that's a good thing overall, that it's happening slowly, methodically, and overall getting to an equilibrium I think is good for both buyers and sellers. So overall, our market in Los Angeles is about a 40, which means the market has improved slightly for buyers in the last few months, and maybe sellers need to be just aware that they can't get everything they want or be more strategic about what they do. Okay, so let's get into the news now that you know where the market really is. One of the real propaganda sources in news is CNBC. They're basically a propaganda arm of the federal government. And they came out with an article this week called, where are we? Why are we having this interesting story problem here? A little technical problem, people. Hang on one second. We have a issue where for some reason my share button keeps sending the last tab instead of the current tab. And we don't want that. There we go. Okay. So here we are, CNBC. And the article is the housing market explained in 6 charts. Now, I will say that, hey, good for them. They're trying to break it down to data rather than make up some phony story like they do regularly. And then here's an interesting key point, though. The housing market looks far different than it did when the pandemic was just starting. Interesting they note that. So here's the 6 different charts. Interest rates have jumped up during the period. That's because the federal government is stealing your money by inflating it away and use the pandemic to seize control of the economy. And that's what's happening in that chart. From 2020, you can see where rates went up to where they are today. Home prices have jumped up as a result of inflation. No mystery. Just like when you play Monopoly, you throw money in the board, prices go up across the board. Affordability goes down when you take money and give it to your good friends. The other people don't have as much money. The people who don't have money can't afford to buy a house. Therefore, housing affordability goes down. The amount of money needed to buy a house has gone up. So to make people feel bad about themselves, they don't make enough money to buy a house. More and more that's happening here in America. And the year-over-year price change in affordability in that chart. But what's fascinating about all 6 charts is they all start at 2020. And I want to call 2020 as the genesis year, the year 1 for those government powerful people who took over our economy. They forced us to wear masks. They decried we had to take vaccines that were never really fully proven. And then they destroyed small businesses, favored large businesses. And so here we are in 2020, and Shazam, interest rates are higher. Well, why is that? Because they spent so much money that we didn't have and giving it to the preferred programs. The people who got the money did well, and the people who didn't get the money didn't do well. It's not really a mystery. And so I think that's where, and we'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. But CNBC wants to kind of get on board that life changed starting 2020, and it did. And there's a reason why that's the case. Interesting news article in the LA Times that LA prices in Southern California have gone up by 8% overall over last year's price. And I think that's good news. Now, I will say I took the Google search. I did not click on the LA Times because there's a paywall and nobody pays for the LA Times. It's just, I grew up on the LA Times. It used to be a great source of news, and nowadays it's just a rag. But the stats they quoted online through Zillow were home prices are up 8% over a year ago. Now think about, if I offered you an investment that would go up 8%, right? That's better than the stock market has averaged over a long period of time. Not only that, you could borrow maybe at 6 or 6.5%, as much as you want at 8%. How much would you borrow? As much as you can. Not only that, you wouldn't pay taxes on the appreciation until you sold it, unlike other stocks where you have to turn over regularly in some cases. Well, that's a good deal. Not only that, real estate has some tax preferences. You can, if it's your house, defer some of the, or avoid some of the taxable income. If you die, you could pass it on without being passed on the taxable part. If it's an investment, you can roll perhaps some of the taxes into the next property. So a great investment, and here we are in LA. As tough as the real estate market is, as bad as people tell you it is, the reality is home prices went up in the last year by 8% in Southern California, which I think is good news. Okay, so here is next piece of, I think, false news, is Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell is one of the most educated idiots in America. He's one of those guys with all kinds of degrees and in all the right parties. He's worth a fortune. He's worth $30 to $50 million, telling the little people what we should do to get by in life. And so he comes up with this gem, which is the best thing we can do for housing is succeed in getting inflation down to 2%. Now, first off, the answer to that is, well, duh. If you stop stealing 5% of our economy every year through inflation, then everybody benefits, right? It's Jerome Powell and his pal, what was her name? I'm drawing a blank on the woman who said that inflation was transitory. These are the idiots who allow our government, they give them a backdrop to allow them to spend money we don't have that causes inflation that robs all of us of our assets. The reason why we pay more groceries is because the federal government spent our money, put it in their pockets and their friends' pockets in preferred places. And then you have Jerome Powell, the educated moron, saying, well, the best thing we could do is keep inflation down to 2%. Well, duh. Stop stealing our money by spending money we don't have on programs that don't work, programs we don't need, and sending money to foreign countries in wars we don't need. If you stop stealing our money, of course, we'll have more. But there's Jerome Powell, and that's what passes for intelligence in today's market. Let's see. Next, under people who are have power and are not very useful, here in Los Angeles, we have a fascinating new policy. Oops, I lost my spot there. Where are we? Let's get this back on. We'll go over here. Here we are in Los Angeles. We're going to solve the dog housing problem. LA is going to allow more dogs per house to ease the shelter crowding. Now, You know, I'm not a dog person. My wife has a dog in our house. Okay, whatever. I don't want to be cruel to dogs. It bothers me to see dogs abused. I feel horrible when I see a dog hit by a car. But I'm not a dog person. And I want to see dogs in shelters, and I want to see them in crowded shelters. But really, LA is doing more to help dogs from overcrowding in shelters than they are human beings who are on the streets. Right? We're going to allow people to have more dogs in houses, but we're not changing zoning to allow more people in a house. Because the dogs who are in shelters that are crowded have their attention, not people living on the streets. Just think that one through for a second. If you see the logic, now put that down in the comments below. I don't see it. I just think it's one of those things that sounds good, and you have these government bureaucrats who have nothing better to do than exercise their power. So they're going to restrict how many dogs you have, they'll let you have more dogs. I'm not really a dog person. I don't really care so much. It just seems to me that we're putting our attention, our focus on the wrong issues. And I think when people are failing, the first thing to do is stop digging and focus on the problem at hand. Speaking of which, again, the government will say they're trying to alleviate housing problems, but the reality is, when you look at what they do, they're not. California, for example, is now restricting more housing by putting on permanent restrictions on water. Now, if you believe the government officials who've never done anything to develop water, you're not talking about water engineers, you're not talking about people from the water industry, you're talking about politicians who have an agenda. They'll tell you, we don't have enough water in California, and we have to conserve, and we have to have desert landscape, and we have to have whatever, astroturf. Now, we don't want astroturf, whatever. They don't even know what they want. So now we're going to have permanent restrictions. So we're going to have lousy showers here in California forever. We're going to have limited watering of our plants and watering of our lawns in Los Angeles forever as part of the progressive dream. But what we know is there's no limit to water. One of the smartest men in the world, one of the wealthiest men in the world, Elon Musk, said quite clearly, there's an unlimited amount of water, and it's very cheap. In fact, he's doing this for his own factories. We have desalination, has technology that easily can, and it has worked in Israel, for example, has worked in Africa in places where water isn't a problem. It's a political problem, not a financial problem. It's not a technical problem. But it's a problem that our politicians are going to use to justify not building more houses, not building more units, and as a result, make our housing situation worse. So just another example of where in California, our state is making things worse. Now, interesting article came out from Cal Matters, which is a nonprofit evaluating the homeless situation in California, and they talk about 6 myths about the housing market that they want to undo. And I just thought they're interesting because it just shows you how people phrase information, always shows you where they're holding on it. So myth 1, most unhoused people, notice the word, they're not homeless anymore, they're unhoused. That's an important political statement because if they're unhoused, it's your fault. If they're homeless, it's their fault. We don't want to blame them. Most people come from somewhere else. That's a myth. Well, they say it's a myth in big, bold letters. Well, if you read their data, which is probably exaggerated and false as well, but even by their data, they found that 90% of the homeless people were from California when they became homeless. 75% lived in the same county when they were last housed, which means 25% came from a different county to the one they're in. 66% were born in California, which means 37% came here from some other state and became homeless. And 87% were born in the U.S., which means 13% were not born here. This doesn't also account for homeless children who are brought here by illegal immigrants and then are born here in the U.S., but they're really a product of illegal immigration. But look, if we could solve 13%, why not? If we could solve 37% of the problem by limiting people moving here who don't have plans, by not giving them welfare and then leaving them on the streets and encouraging them to have drugs, there's all kinds of possibilities here, even in these numbers in this myth. The second myth they have is that everyone living in the street is addicted to drugs or mentally ill. Now, again, these are their statistics. They're going to make it the best possible light. They want you to believe that everybody who's homeless is just a random fluke of luck or the result of bad capitalism, and in reality, they can solve the problem with a government program. But it says in their statistics, 56% reported ever using amphetamines, ever. Who uses them once? 33% said they use cocaine regularly. And 22% using non-prescribed opiates regularly. Regularly. That doesn't count the irregular. So if you have it once a week and you're homeless, that's not really counting these numbers. And then 24% have serious mental illness. And 27% reported substance use disorder. So again, these numbers are staggeringly large when you consider how many people are homeless because of either coming here from other countries and not being prepared, or drugs or mental health. They want you to believe, well, really, it's all three is the same person. There's one guy who's an alien who has mental health problems and is on drugs, and the rest are all just hard luck results of bad capitalism. That's clearly not the case, even by their own statistics. And then another one was most people living on the streets are veterans. I don't think anybody believes that. It's heartbreaking when you see veterans because we've given them medical benefits, we've given them housing benefits, and it is sad to see any veterans at all, I think. And then people who are homeless don't work and don't want to work. That's a myth because they actually asked these people and they all said they want to work. Well, part of the problem now is with minimum wage, it's harder to get a job at lower prices. If you're homeless, maybe you might take a job at $10 or $15 an hour, but we won't let you in Los Angeles now or in California because you have to get 20% in a fast food job. And so that's part of the problem is people, and of course, if you can't go from homeless to the executive suite. You got to start a job and work your way up. But we've eliminated so many entry-level jobs by raising the minimum wage to make it impossible for people who are starting homeless to move. There are nonprofits that take these people and get them started at a low level and raise them up and such, which is great. But there's no businesses able to do that because we've really destroyed that opportunity with the elimination, basically, of minimum wage as an entry point for people in our market. Okay, I started this whole post with a claim that the federal government is really an attack on our real estate market. And I'm going to give you three different examples, three different industries that your federal government, when you pay your federal tax dollars, is actually making it harder to do business to the point of, I think, disrupting and or destroying the industry. Number one is evictions. Now, when I talk about evictions, most people think of deadbeats not paying rent because that's by far the biggest problem. I'm sure there are a few people who have bad landlords, a few, but by and large nowadays, I don't hear that as a real estate agent as often, 10% of the time maybe. But we have our deadbeat tenants. And so in the past, if you ever went to eviction court in Los Angeles, you would see numerous nonprofit organizations offering free legal services to prospective tenants. They actually would call people in the hallway, hey, do you have an attorney? Do you have an attorney? And so there was nobody in my experience who ever went to the court, who responded to their summons, who could not have gotten free legal help as a tenant, whether they were worthy or not, whether they were deadbeats or not, they could have gotten free legal care, legal services. However, the party in power, the Los Angeles politicians, primarily Democrats, see those nonprofits as their political allies. And so what they're now doing is raising money, tax dollars to pay those people. And so have those people in turn do work for their politicians of favor instead. And so here's an example of the federal government now doing this nationwide. HUD is making $40 million available. It says to prevent evictions, but what the money is to legal services. And again, there's no claim anywhere in this that tenants don't have access to legal services for free today, because it's just simply not true in almost all of the United States. I'm sure there are places that's not true, but in major cities, the nonprofit legal services are operatives of the local politicians. And so all this is a way to use tax dollars. And again, this goes back to inflation, programs we don't need or want. This is just taking tax dollars and paying the political friends of the federal government to do the work that they otherwise can't. So there you have step one in the government attacking our real estate industry. So number two, I found this one fascinating. The Appraisal Foundation had a lawsuit from Housing Urban Development. And what this says is that HUD decided that becoming an appraiser somehow required one to overcome discrimination. Now, I will say that I've known appraisers of all colors of skin and nationalities my entire career here in Los Angeles. And I don't get too, I know a black person on you, but I've known several appraisers of every type of color, skin, race, or whatever. The funny thing about it is to get your license, you go through the state government. You don't go through a company. Yes, you can get hired by a company, but to get your license, it's the state of California. So to get your license, if there's a barrier of entry because of race, that would be indictment of the state of California, which should be indicted. But I don't think you could say that the state discriminates against anybody for race, creed, color, or sex in giving out licenses for appraisers. And then when it comes to the work appraisers, in my experience, whenever you order an appraiser, all you get at most is a list, company name, maybe the appraiser and their license number, phone number and email, maybe an address. You never get a picture. You never get the race. I don't know how you would possibly discriminate against an appraiser on their race, creed, color, or sex. If you wanted to. I've been in business 38 years. I was a lender for a good part of my year. I've hired thousands of appraisals in my career. I literally couldn't tell you how we could discriminate against a company if we wanted to. And yet here you have the federal government and they're beating their chest. And I just want to kind of read some of the highlights because there's nothing like a government bureaucrat when they extort money from taxpayers. She said, today's historic agreement, it's historic. You never heard of it till my article, but it's historic. We'll build a class of appraisers based on what they know instead of who they know. What they're doing is they're establishing this money into a fund that they're going to give out to their preferred schools. And this is a way, again, the government uses its power to pay political friends. And they're going to put money in certain schools. And then the schools will give scholarships to those politicians' kids and friends and whatever. So the whole thing is just one hand washing the other. But here you have HUD Acting Secretary Adrian Todman saying the historic agreement is going to help people and will be one step closer to rooting out discrimination in housing and opening doors to opportunity. How? What does that do? You're going to give money to your selected group of people based on color. Now you could have, for example, the daughter of an African-American billionaire is going to qualify for this money, right? People like Kamala Harris, whose parents were both professors at major colleges, would qualify for this money. So how does this possibly help eliminate discrimination? Nobody says, there's no proof. Nobody really cares because everybody in the story is getting paid. The appraisers were being threatened with being destroyed by the federal government. So they're glad to settle for whatever they can. They cried uncle and they're writing a big fat check. And then the government employees get to distribute the money as though, kind of like criminals after robbing a house, they get together and they send the money out. So there you have the eviction money with HUD. Second, we have the appraisal shakedown. And the third one is, I've talked about this one before, but this one's particularly troubling the way it's being presented, I think, at least to me, by the Wall Street Journal. The DOJ asked, does a landmark real estate settlement go far enough? Now, this settlement literally is upending the entire real estate industry. Every single residential sale from here forward, once they figure out what the settlement means, is going to be changed effectively. One lawsuit in one city, St. Louis, with one judge, one jury, and one attorney got a class of people to represent America and say, we want to restructure the way real estate's done. And it's disrupting the entire industry, forcing major corporations that are losing money to offer money because they can't afford to fight the federal government and the class action lawsuit. And now the Department of Justice is saying, well, that's not enough. The fact that they lost a lawsuit to private parties is enough. We want to get involved. So you have Department of Justice, who has no knowledge of real estate, no experience in real estate. They're just attorneys out for blood. They're political operatives who want to extract power to give it to their preferred parties in this destruction. And so here's the Wall Street Journal, which used to be a pro-business article, but pay attention. The Wall Street Journal has also become a propaganda arm for the federal government. The Wall Street Journal news section reported that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, which we know now is not true. And they never retracted it as a news organization. They're just basically another propaganda arm of the federal government. And so they're making this article as though the DOJ, how else can we destroy real estate? What else can we do? The entire industry is reeling from this court decision. In California, the California Association of Realtors, we've put hundreds of hours into understanding the lawsuit, recreating forms and contracts so we can present to our customers, buyers and sellers, protect them, protect ourselves, do business. And this filing by the DOJ came out right before the documents were set to be updated and stopped everything. Because everybody's scared of being sued by the federal government, and rightly so. You have an out-of-control federal government suing everybody to put its 2 cents in on every single situation. And as a result of uncertainty and delays and wasted money on legal fees and wasted money on trying to understand what the federal government's doing, everybody loses. In an already difficult real estate market, your federal government is making it way, way worse. Probably like a lot of things, but particularly in real estate. And it makes you wonder, why is the government at every angle destroying private enterprise and making it harder to buy houses? And you have to answer that question. If you have the answer, tell me, reply, put a comment down below. If you like this, like it. If you don't, put down the down thumb. Subscribe if you want more. I'm at Bill Gross Probate on social media. Thank you so much for your time and support. Make today your best day ever.